Okay, we're continuing on slide 18. We're already into the year 1882. The first big budget client, Procter and Gamble, spent $11,000 that year on advertising. $11,000. That was a lot of money back then. This company's main product was Ivory soap. As I said, Ivory soap was one of the first well-known products that everybody bought. Um, it made its appearance in general stores. The general store used to have a big pickle barrel, and of course, it didn't have pickles in it. It had bars of soap in it that people from around the area would make by hand, and they would sell them. And this was your first. This was the generic. Um, so we had generic before we had branded products. And then somebody, I guess it was in the 60s or 70s, got the idea to go back to generics where we could lower the price because generic products aren't advertised, and advertising adds a lot to the price of a product. So selling soap was big business in America, and Ivory had this wonderful saying it was 99 and 44 100ths% pure. We don't really know what pure means in that sense, but boy, that was as close to 100% as you could get with soap. Soap used to be sold in plain paper packaging, and all soap was alike until Ivory came around. Oh, and another thing that Ivory used to say, it floats. It was the first soap to float. Um, I guess that was great in a bathtub. If you had a bathtub and you could bathe in it, you wouldn't have to dig around for the bar of soap. It would be floating. In 1893, a cola company got the first registered trademark. Um, Not ever. It got the first registered trademark for a soft drink, and it was Coca-Cola. The company bookkeeper came up with the original first mark for the brand, and his name was Frank Robinson. And like I said, can you guess? Yes, it's Coca-Cola. In 1900, NW Air started a business getting department. Um, so a lot of things were developing. A business getting department. This department was based on the marketing needs of the clients. Marketing in America now had a name. Business getting was what it was all about. And in 1906, the first $1 million advertising client was born. Can you guess which company broke the $1 million barrier to promote its cereal products? Well, this was the first company to get a registered trademark on its cereal. And this was Kellogg's. I'm sorry, I goofed there. The first one to get a registered trademark was um, oatmeal, Quaker Oats. But this was the biggest company selling its wares, and that was Kellogg's. It was born in 1906, and its ad budget grew to $1 million in 1915. So you see this W.K. Kellogg. It was the nation's breakfast. It was a competitor of Quaker Oats. Then we have another form of advertising. It was outdoor billboard ads. Today we call it outdoor advertising. Um, and in 1916, it came to be. It was mostly under the control of a group of representatives from many different agencies, and they formed this new entity, which was called the National Outdoor Advertising Bureau, and it controlled about 75% of all outdoor ads during this period of time. Here's a billboard for the women of Colorado. You have the vote. That looks like a woman who's putting that billboard up. Here's a question for you. Think about it. Why did this form of advertising grow so quickly at this particular period of time? What was happening about this time? Um, I'll let you think on that for a little bit and we'll move on to the next form of advertising, which was found on the radio. The first sponsored radio show aired in 1923. In those days, we called it sponsoring instead of advertising. On the radio, later on television, one company would sponsor an entire program for however long it was on. If it was on for 15 minutes, if it was on for 30 minutes, if it was on for an hour, um, there was one advertiser for that entire period of time. In 1924, other companies began sponsoring radio programs, and the age of radio advertising was in full swing. Goodrich Tires was the first company to sponsor a 1 hour radio program. Now, this is interesting because we're going to go back to the billboard and think about that again. Why did that take off? And why in the world would Goodrich Tires be the kind of company that would sponsor a 1 hour radio program? Well, if you'll remember, we were talking earlier about Henry Ford, and we had a lot of companies now coming out and building cars. And with cars driving around, we didn't have an organized roadway system yet, but billboards were put up wherever cars would go because those are the eyeballs you wanted. So if you were on a busy road, you had a lot of cars coming by, and those eyeballs were looking for something to see. And why not put your advertising there? And now, because we had so many cars being sold, people had to get replacement tires. So Goodrich was one of the first tire companies, and they had enough money to sponsor an entire show. And in 1929, we came to a screeching halt, somewhat like what is going on right now. The stock market crashed, and advertising revenue plummeted from a high of $3.5 billion down to just 4 years later, $1.5 billion. It's not that people weren't listening to the radio. They were. Those who had purchased them before the crash had radios and they were listening to them. But those who had not purchased them before now had no money with which to purchase them. So, and a lot of these companies had no money to advertise. So we lost that bit of revenue. Okay, we're going to continue in a minute.